Hello, today I'm going to be talking about equitable public education for English language learners. Basically, this assignment entailed looking over a vast amount of different landmark cases and events that have comprised the development of the United States educational system. I'm taking more of an equity lens, but more specifically an equity for English language learners, as some of their rights are very applicable to today's political setting. So I think anytime you are beginning to analyze the uh, the U.S. education system, especially with an equity lens, you kind of have to start in 1964 with two major things. Number one is the Civil Rights Act. So the Civil Rights Act basically says you cannot discriminate based on race, gender, religion, that sort of thing, um, or national origin. Perhaps more specifically to education was Brown versus Board of Education, which says segregation, which in this case was, segregating white kids from black kids, was inherently unequal. So a law against that. And this began what is actually still around today of like segregation of schools. The next up, and this one was actually kind of new for me, was Deanna versus California State Board. And it's surprisingly early in the U.S. system of education, especially considering how relevant it is today. And basically, what happened in this was that students, mostly Chinese American and Mexican American students, were tested for special education classes in English. These were essentially IQ tests, and although we use more comprehensive tests now, that's what was used at the time. And what they found is that a lot of these students, if these tests were performed in their native language, would actually do just fine. So basically, there's a law that says that these test scores have to be used with an evaluation of the child's developmental history, cultural background, academic achievement, and most importantly, in their home language. Now, this is particularly interesting because overrepresentation of English language learners is still quite problematic today. Moving along, we have Lau versus Nichols. This is probably one of the biggest cases in terms of bilingual education. We had a lot of Chinese American students in San Francisco who had no access to content because it was entirely done in English. So again, landmark case, they said that students need to be able to access the content, and that this is you have to have these programs to do so. This kind of started the legality of bilingual education. In this case, it was actually in Chinese. A little bit later, 1978, Castaneda and Pickard said, no, you can't just offer these programs, but these programs actually have to be kind of good, and you have to have a way to assess these programs and see if they're actually achieving what they're supposed to be achieving. So Castaneda versus Pickard, this actually isn't on the list, but it kind of gives the teeth to the Lau versus Nichols. One interesting thing about the Lau versus Nichols, if when you're in kind of district work or even at school level, every single school must have a plan developed for how they're going to service their English language learners, and it's most commonly referred to as a Lau plan. So what they're going to do, how they're going to assess it, and this was definitely specified again in No Child Left Behind, but every single school or every single district needs to have a plan in mind. 1982, and this is especially relevant today, the Supreme Court rules in Plyer versus Doe that undocumented children have the same right to free public education as U.S. citizens and permanent residents. This is undocumented immigrant students. And furthermore, inquiring about a student's immigration status, including requiring documentation or their social security number, is against the law. So this is huge. This is basically why schools are inherently kind of sanctuary places for undocumented students. So these are five basic events, different legislation elements that have taken place in the U.S. history that regard equity or students' ability, especially students who are often marginalized, to gain access to education. Now, there's also many different state level kind of approaches. Recently, we've had California Proposition 58, which strikes down the previous Proposition 227. So in 2006, excuse me, not 2017, in 2006, basically California passed this law saying that like students need to learn English, and they need to learn English in English. And despite many, lots of academics saying that, If you build literacy in your first language and then you then transfer that literacy to the acquisition of English, you'll do better. These students were not allowed to receive instruction in other languages. So you can see at the state level, they're still kind of battling over some of these elements, but right now, bilingual education is kind of on the rise. So this was just a brief kind of outline of some different landmark cases and events that has shaped how students, primarily students who are English language learners, have gained rights and protection in the United States education system. Thanks.